Today we are joined in the studio by Dr Mandla Langa, who is one of South Africa's leading authors, a poet, journalist, and an award-winning writer of many novels, to mention one, Colours of the Chameleon, which won the Commonwealth Award. He is joining us today in conversation with his book, or rather a book that he co-authored with the former President Nelson Mandela, the book titled Dare Not Linger, The Presidential Years. The book is about President Nelson Mandela's presidential years, which the president started off himself and could not finish due to ill health. In this conversation, we can expect lots of insights from President Nelson Mandela's time as president and preparation for leading South Africa as the first democratically elected president of the country, and the challenges and also the gains that he made in this journey, and the lessons, very important lessons on leadership that he shares with us in this book. We do hope that you will take away the knowledge, the insights, and also be inspired to read in your own spaces, whether it be at work or in your own personal life, so that we can inculcate the culture of learning and reading in our nation. That is quite important today. Thank you very much.
As the singer would go, the world changes and revolutionaries die. And the children forget. Ghetto is their first love, and their dreams are drenched in gold. And we don't even cry no more. Are the beautiful ones really dead? Nizilibele uba nizalwa ngobani. Inhlungu zomama balilele insuku zobume benu. Inhlungu zobawo balwela izwe lakho. It is in this pain that we sit and we remember how hard fought this freedom is. It is in this pain that we remember the death of our fathers should not have been in vain. It is in this pain that we celebrate the men who reminded us that after you've climbed a mountain, you realize how many more mountains are there. And as we had taken a brief moment for us to rest, we dare not linger. The issues of last week and the last 3 weeks have showed us clearly that we dare not linger. The events themselves had taught us a lot, but they've also taught us that as the man stood up and said, never, never, and never again shall in this land be an oppression by one by the other. And therefore, today I welcome Mandla Langa, a recipient of many awards, a journalist, a poet, a writer, an incredible man, a man who's very humble and does not speak much of his struggle credentials. He speaks much more of his education and more than anything else. Dr. Langa, welcome. Welcome to our contribution as the Gautrain. On the same grounds that Nelson Mandela had wished that this nation be educated, we try by all means every month to bring a new book. But we thought in this month we needed to honor the man who you had brought to life in an incredible book, Dare Not Linger. It is our culture that speaks of, I am honored to lead. It is one of our values. Leadership is one of our values, as what they call it, as an organization, as part of our culture. This is done on the day after the president of the late Nelson Mandela. Again, welcome. And welcome to, what do they call it, to the Gautrain e-lounge. Apparently we've gone live today, so you are the man who either will make me famous or or create a long-term problem. Welcome, sir.
Thank you very much, Tsepo. I'm honored to be part of this very brainy initiative by yourselves, by Gautrain management, to extend the understanding of what this country is all about through the books that people have written. I know that some of my predecessors have been here and they've done wonderful work, and I raise my hat to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Langa. Let's start in the beginning. Who is the man, as they now say, who has the guts, or who, as they say in creative writing, has the intestinal fortitude to take the time to finish a memoir that we would never have seen and be able to. So, who is Mandla Langa? If we were to start there, before 1976 and going abroad and going into exile, who is Mandla Langa?
You know, as you well know, my main preoccupation is writing novels. And in novels, you make things up, you create scenarios, you come up with, you to use the word I to write in the first person. So to describe myself, I'm just a township boy from KwaMashu, one of the townships that has featured very prominently in the past week when that turbulence happened in South Africa. And I grew up and I went to school in KwaMashu, and my father was a minister of religion, and so one of the first books I started reading was the Bible. But then I had other brothers who were the bringers of literature into our house, and I started to read long before I went to school, which was very, very useful for me because I then excelled in compositions, in essays, and the teachers really encouraged me to think of writing when I grow up, and so that's what happened. This is a journey that has taken quite a number of years, but it's a journey that I undertook, I think, with a lot of love and a lot of appreciation.
Thank you, sir. Let's go back to the beginning. And the funny thing is, that moment, we all are clear of where we were at that point when it happened. Utata walking out of Victor Verster prison. That moment that I still remember out as a young man in the old Buputatana, everything stopped that day. In actual fact, I think the last 3 kilometers of going home, I had to walk it because the streets had filled up with people who were now singing Nelson Mandela, Nelson Mandela, Ahuna Watswanangliena. When that moment occurred, first, where were you? And in essence, being an MK veteran, what did that moment mean to you?
For me, the day before Mandela was released, I was phoned by the leader of the anti-apartheid movement in the UK. I was in London at that time. I was working for the ANC. I was the deputy chief representative of the ANC, and also in charge of cultural affairs in Europe, Western Europe, and in the UK. And Mike Terry was the head of the anti-apartheid movement. So he phoned me and said to me that there will be an announcement made on ITV later. I must just tune in. And I tuned in, and that was on the 2nd, on the day leading to the 2nd, when de Klerk then announced that they will no longer be holding, there's no reason to be holding Mandela in prison. And I was alone in the house, strangely. And there was a picture of Nelson Mandela in a gray suit, looking very, very, very slim and thin and gaunt, almost like somebody from the East. And when I saw that, we then had to go to the South African house, which was the South African embassy. By then, the whole of London, the whole of the United Kingdom had been mobilized for us to be on the steps outside there on the ground. And this was an area where every day of the week. And so there we were, and then we saw the television which had been rigged up on the wall, and we saw Madiba coming out, raising his fist. And it's a moment that was as seminal as, I'm sure, as seminal as birth, really, because it was so important. All of us, I mean, I don't care whether it was Father Trevor Huddleston or any of the Labour MPs who had always been part and parcel of our struggle. When they saw this, people were humbled. People lost it. Some were weeping. So it was a memorable day, and I was standing next, and he had his son on his shoulders. And there's a picture there where we stood, just watching this thing unfolding before us. It was memorable.
Right in front of Trafalgar.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, right in front of Trafalgar's house. Now, there's a lot of moments in this book, but the conversation that sparks all of this, you say, or the book says, because you as you say, as an author, you try and write in the what do they call it, in the third person. To be great is to be misunderstood. Now, in the midst of this negotiating for prisoners to be released and all of that, and we'll talk about the man's altruism and him forcing that the other prisoners must be released first before him. But the role of Walter Sisulu and Owar Tambo in the background, because when he started negotiating with the apartheid government, even probably yourself sitting in London, you probably thought this man has lost his mind. What is he doing? And he was misunderstood by then. And we can only connect the dots backwards. First is your emotion about knowing that he was negotiating and starting to speak to, what do they call it, to the regime back then. But then also the role that Sisulu and Owar played in making sure that it is understood what he was doing.
Once the president of the ANC, Oliver Tambo, announced or made it known that there were some measures that were being taken inside the country. This happened soon after the Kabwe conference of 1985. And you must remember that that was the most violent time in South Africa. People were dying in droves. Yes. There were a number of states of emergency. But because of our knowledge of Oliver Tambo, when it came from him that whatever happens in every struggle, at the end of the day, there would be not an accommodation, but there would be a conversation with the enemy, there would be the word negotiations started to come across, to crop in the conversations. You must remember also that that was foregrounded by a number of what we call safaris of various delegations from South Africa coming to speak to the ANC in Dakar, in Zimbabwe, in London, in various jurisdictions. And so, in a sense, it came as a surprise. Of course, the one thing then that we might even talk about much later is how MK felt, the members of Mkhonto weSizwe,
Yes.
when it came to the codification of the element of those negotiations, the issue of dropping the armed struggle. That was hard.
And talking about that, when everybody had prepared, I mean, it felt like a boxing match that had been called off in itself. But freedom of achievement is limited by the necessity of the environment that it must occur. That Mandela understood very well. He also understood that negotiating with what do they call it, with de Klerk at that point in time would have complicated a whole lot of other things. Now, from a perspective as what do they call it, as an MK veteran, and sometimes I still hear, I mean, I sit on one of the trusts of what do they call it, of the local veterans associations here.
All right.
And I still hear in some of the meetings, the rumbling still occurs. And a longing for the days to go back at Latin.
Right.
Still come up, and we have to calm it down. But how was that achieved? What do they call it? We know the ANC is a very broad church,
right?
But it's how was that achieved?
Well, the ANC is a broad church, and the ANC has got had a number of very trusted lieutenants. There were people, for instance, who, when they made that accommodation, when they agreed then, when they said that even though it sticks in their craw, even if it goes against their instincts, people like Chris Hani, for instance, when they finally said that they accept this as committed members of the ANC and committed members of Mkhonto weSizwe, then it became almost immediately, automatically acceptable to everyone. But it was not a very easy thing to swallow. But you must remember where Mandela also came from when it comes to conflict, when it comes to understanding the price that people pay for armed struggle, for armed conflict, especially if the forces ranged against you might be superior. You might ultimately win, but it might be a Pyrrhic victory with an inestimable number of casualties. Here at scene, you remember I did mention this in the book, the various struggles in various places. In India, for instance, the partition in 1947. He had read the memoirs of Nehru and Gandhi and various people that had been involved, including, the Afrikaners themselves, the generals, in the olden days when they fought in the Boer War. He understood that at the end of it all, the most important thing for a leader is to minimize the possibility of bloodshed, the possibility of a wasteful loss of life.
But Dr. Langa, he does something interesting, extremely altruistic on his part. He fights that all the political prisoners must be, so he sets a set of conditions for negotiations. Political prisoners must be released, the unbanning of the order they call it. Now we're sitting there, all these announcements are being made, but until the one on the 2nd, when, like said, there is no point in holding him in prison anymore. We were not sure, because that was very confusing, because you're seeing people coming out, but in as much as the men who, we sang about, the London concert to free Mandela in the 80s and they continued on into the 90s itself, now he is not out. I mean, at that point in time, what was everybody thinking?
I happened to be in Zimbabwe, in Lusaka and Zimbabwe, at around 1997, 87, sorry. When the talk of Mandela's release was very, very topical on the tongues of everyone. And there were people that were saying that he was going to be released in Lusaka, he was going to be released in Zimbabwe, he was going to be released in this or that place. And you remember that around that time there was also the escape of Mumbaris and Tim Jenkin and so on and so forth. What I know in the research that we were doing then for the book was that Mandela was one person that always wanted to lead, not from the back, but from the front. He was a person that wanted to make examples, and some of the examples were incredibly symbolic. For him, it was important that he was not seen to be the one, to be the first to benefit from the fruits of freedom. And the fruits of freedom, he understood them to be fruits of freedom that belonged to the people of South Africa. And the people of South Africa deserved to have their leaders. He believed in the semiotics, in the appearances, in the drama, in the theater of struggle, for people to see these figures, to say, here we are now. This is a gradual move towards, my own liberation or my own freedom.
In the video of the song, When They Come Back, you see that boat as it approaches the wharf in Cape Town.
Yes.
Will be beating the drums when they come back.
Yeah.
But one day me and you will talk more about that. We're here to talk about an important man who,
Right.
for me, the level of consultation he did on everything else. Firstly, one understands, we all become our mentors in some way or another. And, the late O.R. Tambo was, to a fault, a very consultative person. Do you think that the president and the former president at that point in time, he was trying to emulate O.R. in all aspects in itself?
Meg Maharaj, who was present in most of these events, and who also was one of the chroniclers of especially when it comes to Long Walk to Freedom, speaks of the moment when the Robben Islanders themselves had to grapple with this question of talking to the enemy, so to say. And the first person that had to be consulted about this, Nelson Mandela there was a triad of sorts. There was Nelson Mandela, there was Walter Sisulu, who was in actual fact his political mentor. He's the one that, in a sense, had groomed him and had shaved off some of the hard edges of Mandela. And of course, at the political, hardcore political thrust was Oliver Tambo. So those three people, even Madame Graça Machel speaks about that, about those were the two people Nelson Mandela believed in with his whole life. And so, because of the role Oliver Tambo played in ensuring that the ANC was held intact for over 30 years out there, in the most hostile environment, and to be shaped and cohered into a functional modern political movement. And so he had to trust that person. In any event, they had worked together as in the same legal firm a long time ago.
Yes, but we were also dealing with one of the young lions. The people who, in many conferences at the beginning as Youth League leaders, the original young lion himself, he understood the loneliness of command. And in the loneliness of command, we say, no matter how much you consult, eventually somebody's going to have to take a decision. And Mandela knew that very well. Now, he had a way, and in the way it's explained in the book, where even after he had made a decision, he would still go back and consult. Now, what built that? I mean, this is quite an interesting attribute, but he was also willing to give in if an idea wasn't going to fly with everybody. But when he had made a decision, he stuck to it.
Well, we must remember, even with the famous treason trial, with the famous, not the treason trial per se, but the one we call the Rivonia trial, he was willing to put his head on the block to say that for these ideals I'm willing to die. You get what I'm trying to say? And so he was that kind of person. He had these hard convictions, but because these hard convictions were not only pertaining to him alone, they were pertaining to millions of people, to the destiny of millions of people, men, women, and children, both inside the prison and out there in the bigger world. And he understood that in all this, even if I may be convinced, I still have to be guided by the collective understanding, the collective wisdom of my colleagues. And I am sure there are many ideas he might have had, some which might have really, really been radical. But at the end of the day, through this consultation, things were then shaped in the form that they finally came out.
The decision to, as what do they call it, as the run-up to the full negotiations at Codesa and everything else, he had a very strong conviction about having everybody included. The man was a modern-day strategist and censor of note. What was he seeing that all of us, to a great degree, beyond what you've just said now, that he needed to make sure that the dream survives? Beyond that, what was he seeing that actually was just there and glaringly not? I mean, as MK soldiers, they were saying, no, he's going too far. With this trying to include everybody, inclusive of people that we had fought with down in KZN and everybody else and all of other things. And so, what was he seeing? And maybe I'm asking the wrong person, but from your thoughts and from the manuscript?
From my thoughts, I think what he had seen is something that I've sort of alluded to, and that is he had seen the ravages, the toll on humanity when it comes to circumstances where people politically win wars and then the winner takes all. He wanted a lasting peace. That was his major preoccupation, to make sure that whatever happens in South Africa, there aren't residues of discontent that can lead to an upsurge again that brings us back into bloodshed. Hence, if you remember, one of what was then seen as an ill-advised gesture on his part when he came out, when he said to the people of KZN that they must throw their weapons, their arms into the. So there was a certain idealism there, which was not backed by the reality on the ground. But this was his major preoccupation. He wanted to limit as much as possible the possibility of bloodshed.
As we're going with that, the country is an incredible vibe. I still remember as a student sitting in KZN, we had our own skirmishes with, the different political parties and all sorts of other things. But then there it is. Tokyo Zuhale with a bloody tracksuit leaning over the body of Chris Hani. That was a flashpoint that nearly sent the whole country into a big mess, to say it, for what they call it. But right there and there, a moment of leadership.
Image.
Okay. And the use of that moment to actually be able to achieve a whole lot more. And I would have loved to ask them in. I mean, we were baying for blood. I mean, as students at that point in time, and as students and what do they call it in the movement at that point in time, we were calling for blood. And I think a few months before that, the man had come to address us at what do they call it, at the University of Durban-Osville. And we felt a very strong connection to him.
Yes. Well, that's, if you read what happened that night after Chris Hani was murdered by Janusz Walusz, and then Madiba took to the television, to the SAP, to the studios, and spoke and addressed the country. In fact, that is taken as to be the moment he took the leadership. He took over the leadership, the de facto leadership of South Africa, when he made that speech, because it had all the elements of unifying and of quelling fires, of putting out the fires that were really, really already, being stoked in various circumstances. He brought in the role that was played by that, what's her name, Hamse.
Yes.
The woman who saw the number plate, who saw the killer, and who helped in the apprehension of Janusz Walusz. So that bringing in the character, the identity of that woman into the fray was a very, very strategic thing, and a very, some will call it Machiavellian, but I would call it a very, very sensible thing to do, because at the end of the day, it is the collective energy of the people of South Africa that then saved the day, that saved that moment. So he was asking the country that please put down your weapons. Let us see to what extent Chris has already died. His blood has already paved the way for us to find the date, to get the date for the elections. You remember that?
Yes.
That was one of the most important aspects of that killing, the fact that there was no longer any possibility for the National Party to keep on talking about the date for the elections. Let me just say this, because I also remember I drove with a friend from London and my brother Pius in the car to the stadium where the funeral was going to be held. It was in 1993 in April. And the night before, we had been there also, part of the vigil, and I've never seen or been in a place where the anger is almost tactile. You can feel it. You see it in the sleepless eyes of the young lions, the young men and women there, and then you just know that it's a tinderbox. You know, you throw a match there, everything blows up. But it was controlled.
And interestingly enough, you're saying in that speech on that night, up here in SABC, he actually won a lot of battles. Because right there and there, that is when the threat of the elections by the right-wing movements was at its highest.
Absolutely.
And it was quite interesting how he actually turned the whole thing around. But now you have the death of Chris Hani and the rising and the threat of, what do they call it, of AWB and all sorts of other things coming up behind all of that. His ability to actually be able to be very consultative. And I'll be honest with you, I've been in leadership from a very young age, but I still haven't mastered the tact of trying to bring everybody on board. Once I figure out where I'm going, the train moves.
Yeah. No, I think those moments were very, very, very important moments for South Africa. In fact, I think those moments should be remembered when we are going through what we are going through today in South Africa, because it shows us what, as a country, we are capable of being, of going into, of becoming. We were capable at that time, in those hours after Chris passed away, in those hours when the AWP was rattling sabers. This country was heading for a precipice. And I think those moments, the statesmanship that was shown there, is the statesmanship that I believe we should now fast forward to our time here, because we need to be as resolute, to be as, clear in our understanding of the journey that we collectively need to take as South Africans.
There's a moment to take a decision. There's a moment to sit back. A lot of the things talking about this week alone that are being brought up, and some people, or the weeks that are being brought up, is that the president took too long to make decisions and to, what do they call it, to actually address the nation on issues. I think this couldn't have played out any other way, but I am one of the very few. Maybe thinking back to the moment when Mandela knew that on the day of Chris's death, he needed to address the nation. The president at the current moment now faced with a similar challenge, but in a different manner. Delays his address. And in actual fact deals with COVID before he deals with the issues that are at hand in the country.
I believe that the events of the past week were, there was a number of lost opportunities, because the saber rattling, the war, the noise of war, and the noise of war nowadays is no longer out there in the fields.
Yes.
It's there in the media. It's there in the social networks, where people were making threats, where people were seen to be plotting, to be saying things which at the end of the day can be construed as seditious, but nothing was done. So at the end of the day, I think that a very, very, very important opportunity was lost, and it has led us into this morass where we are now trying, as hard as possible to fix, something that should not have happened. The president definitely should have been, at least the lieutenants around the president should have been wise enough to have seen the signs, to have read the leaves, to have said that there is a problem coming. Hence, I find it almost unconscionable that there is even a difference between the president and the minister of defense on what is an insurrection.
Yes.
This was an insurrection. Anyone who has read anything, who understands what's going on in terms of conflict knows an insurrection when it happens.
When they see one. But our nation has an incredible spirit. Whereas you saw people sweeping the streets and they rebuilding their lives. We were as resolute as that a month before the elections occurred. We were saying, come hell or high water, we are voting.
Right.
And we had come down from the days of what do they call it. And at that point in time, we were now mobilizing and educating people on how to vote and everything else. But this nation has an incredible spirit. And it is in that spirit that in this week, we saw it come back again.
We did. There was a report I read this morning by Rebecca Davis in Daily Maverick, where she was really saying that she does not want to hear anything about Nelson Mandela because the whole thing of South Africans being resilient is beginning to stick in her craw. And I see where she comes from, but where she is wrong, where she misses the point in the sense that the hundreds and thousands of people in South Africa today are still going according to the spirit of Mandela when it comes to dealing with their problems, with their circumstances. For instance, there is a lot of poverty, but it is exactly those poor people that you see who are the first to go to the volunteer lines to say, we want to clean up here. Because there is a certain morality that South Africans have got. And that morality comes from having this country being born on the strength of people, of leaders who practice morality. Someone, I think it was James Baldwin, said that politics without morality, or leadership without morality, leads to tyranny. This is the kind of leadership that fought against the tyranny of the apartheid regime. And they brought through a moral struggle, because this is the only struggle that has galvanized so many millions of people worldwide. One of my biggest regrets is that when then, let's say in 1995, 1996, when we were then beginning to become this new republic, we did not go back to those countries, go back to those formations, the anti-apartheid movements worldwide. People were volunteering from as far as Kuala Lumpur, as far as Kingston in Jamaica, saying that you want to come to your country to be part of, of changing the country, of making it more powerful than it could possibly be, because it was an inspirational struggle. We have not taken, how to say this?
Tapped into it.
Absolutely.
Now, we've dissolved the people's forums. In as much as in 1992, 93, I mean, as a student, we were consulted. We were over-consulted, as what do they call it, as a university and as being part of a university that had been part of the struggle for a very long time. Have we lost touch with the people?
I think it was also, again, the evidence of these past weeks, which has proven that much as we have political parties and so on and so forth, we have lost that connectivity, that I'll call it, visceral, that organic connection with the people on the ground. For instance, COVID has come and put a knife in the possibilities of mobilizing. But our people now are without that ongoing evangelizing that used to take place within a political continuum. We are now, there's a lot of fragmentation. People are operating in atomized circumstances. We do need to go back to those forums. We do need for people to understand the gospel of why it is that they became these South Africans that triumphed against all odds. And the forums are very important. Yeah.
Now, before we get there and we talk about the detachment and today's challenges that we're facing, the moment comes up, the speech is about to end. Before he says, "Let freedom reign," I bring up the words again, and I had to write them down so that I can remember them clearly. He says, "Never, never and never again shall it be that this beautiful land will again experience the oppression of one by another." I remember where I was when those words were spoken, through the glass and the toggling between the cameraman outside and the one inside, and the threat of him being shot, and we had that bulletproof glass to protect him as he was being. Now, the inauguration of a new president brings the vibrance, and what did it mean to those? I mean, at that point in time, you were back in the country, and you were no more in London, and you were now mobilizing here.
I was here.
Yes. And were we clear that beyond all of this dancing, there's work to be done?
Yeah. I think one of the examples I always use when I talk to people, when, for instance, they ask me, what is it that Mandela really left us with? Because when you look at the economic circumstances, things are still problematic. I would say that Mandela left us with a capacity to build. He had the framework. He said, here is the framework. It's almost like your father. Your father builds a house and then pays your lobola. I don't think that you expect your father then to say, Tsepo, this is now the time for you to procreate. I don't think so. I think that he left us with a framework for us to build on it. Every generation, as you well know, has got its mission. And our mission was to pick up where the Mandela generation left off and build this fair republic and made that dream that he had into a livable reality.
25 years later, or 27 years later, we remember there was no playbook. So the man speaks and he says, never, never again.
Right.
And he does his shuffle and we're all happy. Now, he's not reinstating the government or taking over a government. He is building a government from scratch. There is no playbook for doing that sort of a thing. But somehow he seemed to have prepared extensively. And even beyond the document ready to govern and all the documents that had followed before that, preparing to govern and all of that, somehow he had a sense of feeling of leadership. And the question still stands today is, how do we develop that sense of leadership? Because everybody knows you can apply for a job and you get it. There's still the day after you've cleaned the office and taken out the papers from the previous incumbent, there's that so what moment. He must have had so many so what moments. So I've won or I've caught this bus and what do I do with it?
Yeah. Well, I think the answer lies somewhere in that question that you asked earlier, in terms of the issues of consultation, the issues of building consensus as much as possible. I think he believed that maybe mistakenly, as events later proved, he believed in the goodness of man, in the goodness of the human being, in the fact that if we agree that this is the road that we are going to travel to reach our destination, then this is the road that we are going to travel to reach our destination. This is the constitution that we have shaped. It's a constitution that is admired the world over, and it's a constitution that I hear people, for instance, saying that why did we have a constitution that can only function in Norway? But that is condescending. That is looking down on our people if you think that way. Mandela had the idea, the foresight to see the crafting of a constitution that would be useful in Norway or suitable in Norway, because he wanted to make sure that our people lived to the level of this constitution, that they benefited to the level of this constitution, not something that is second-hand, third-hand, but first class. And it is up to us then, as a people, to work towards, number one, eliminating poverty, bring about, the kind of employment that, the growth that is sustainable for all the people in this country, and education, all the good things that other democracies take for granted, and move towards a situation where at the end of the day people are going to say, I am proud to be a South African because this is what we have done.
This week I remain proud to be a South African, irrespective of what happened. But as he set up the government of national unity and that inclusiveness, again he's climbing a mountain, because the ever rumblings in the background of what was called his preoccupation with reconciliation are there. And the challenge that sits there, and I think in the loneliness of leadership sometimes, in today's terms, we forget to inspire and create aspirations for our nation. And I think what you've just said now, in what they call it, in what he aspired for in building the Constitution, the decision to only finalize negotiations of the Constitution after government had been set up, was that by design or was that by chance?
I think it was part and parcel of the decisions that had to be made at that particular moment, at that particular time, because what we call of the exigency of the hour. Certain things had to be done, had to be fulfilled first, before then, they could be codified in the context of the final constitution.
Now, with that understanding, and for me, one of the things that intrigues me about Mandela's leadership is that he didn't need to have all the information. He needed to have some level of a picture of what he was seeing. Now, what lessons can we learn? I mean, it's today's leadership. What lessons can we take from that? Because today's leadership is obsessed with having all the, the corners and the data and everything else that they need. What can we glean from that type of leadership, that he didn't need to have everything in place, but he had a sense of what do they call it, and sometimes in a military fashion, of being able to say, as you say, there are things that have to be done at a particular point, and we make those decisions, and then we make the next decision when the next decision comes.
Well, I think that comes from a leadership that knows and trusts the ethos of delegation, that there are things that I have to do, there are things that I have to hand over to other people to do. He understood that perfectly, and I think he delegated as much as he could. But I think the other point that comes into play when you are raising that question is Mandela's constant need to make sure that people are not humiliated. If you look at his whole trajectory as a leader, even when it came to sorting out or solving the problems or striving to solve the problems that were happening not only in South Africa but outside of South Africa. Some of the leaders, for instance, like Gaddafi, etc. So he wanted to deal with those things that within that time frame were important. It was important, for instance, for the Congolese debacle to be sorted out, for the SADCC to be stronger, for the precursor to the AU that his predecessor, that his successor, then put in place to happen, and so on and so forth.
That's interesting. Now we get to that point, constitution is about to be wrapped up, IFP walks out of parliament. An interesting moment. I found myself going back to the book and paging through it as the week's events were unfolding, because a similar insurrection was threatened. Back then, when the federal clause was being negotiated. And the process itself continues on, and KZN threatens to ban. And I remember we had one of the incidents where the Amabuto wanted to force themselves onto campus and come and tell us what must happen and what must not happen. And we lived through those moments, and my parents worried dearly all the time in those years that would happen, where we would wake up and hear that the University of Durban was attacked by the Amabuto. Now, he does something interesting. Instead of, he sets up a commission that looks into the violence and he gets his facts. But he does not make the arrests. That would have, naturally followed. And we go back to the issue you've just raised now. He understood the delicateness of things at that point in time. Now, it can't be that 27 years later, we get threatened with the same notion of what must happen. I mean, is there any other way that this thing can be unclipped from where it's hooked on?
I think in those years, the balance of forces, South Africa was still an earlier work in progress. And all the structures, the different institutions were still very, very weak. And there was still also, you remember, the lack of real coherence when it comes, for instance, in terms of authority when it comes to defense and so on and so forth. I think now, between you and I and the doorpost,
Yes.
there is no reason whatsoever for any dilly-dallying when it comes to enforcing, because what you're saying, in essence, is the enforcement of the Constitution. For the enforcing of the Constitution, I do not believe that there is a person, man or woman, that is higher, whose authority must trump the Constitution. So I think that the dereliction that we spoke about earlier, the incoherence between the security sector in South Africa needs to be looked at again, so that they deal with that situation as comprehensively as possible. Sometimes you have to use force, sometimes you have to negotiate, but sometimes talking has got to come to a stop.
That's incredible. And for me, a leadership question that comes to mind. So the government of national unity collapses. Again, there's another mountain to climb. Now, somebody once told me that my biggest challenge is I am my own lost battle officer. And when you are own lost battles officer, is that you know, in the olden days, generals appointed a lost battles officer. They were there to analyze the battle and what didn't go wrong with it. While the general marched on to the next battle. Now, Mandela was never his own lost battles officer. He left it to other people. Now, an important issue is what made him so capable of being able to, at the moment, you know, something that he had marshaled, something that even his own party at times was not with him on the government of national unity. It collapses, but interestingly enough, he marches on. What can we learn from leadership? And how does leaders not become their own lost battle officers?
I think that comes from a do-or-die sensibility. It comes from a knowledge that at the end of the day, even when things are really, really bad, I have to make do with whatever resources I have. Because remember, he's a moral being. He has gone into this thing from a very, very highly moral position of saying that I believe in this because this is the right thing to do. That's why that phrase, that tagline, even in the ANC when it comes to elections, is the right thing to do. Yes. It comes from that conviction that we are doing the right thing, we're doing the moral thing. But if for whatever reason someone else does not seem then to get it, to understand, then there is nothing we can do. We can only work, we can only proselytize those that we can proselytize. You know this phrase, which is hamba nabahamba.
Yes.
You know, I think he believed in that. That's why you find this song, I do my Yatsama.
Yes.
You know, it's like that. That's how it is.
A lot of people would say from reading the book, the man had a preoccupation with the security cluster right in the beginning. Do we think current leadership has forgotten that it is still a precarious situation? Be it the threat does not come from the other side this time, it comes from the manner in which the current army had been built up, and ultimately that still that match that never took place. People still long for it.
You know, there's a principle that whenever there has been a revolution, there will be a counter-revolution. And if you do not pay heed to your security structures or cluster, then you will find that counter-revolution coming up, because much as we might be at the beginning, we were all attuned to one reality. I think others have been sidetracked by ever so many other things, including the fact that the ANC, some see it as a cash cow or as a license to
print money. Now, Seneca's adage, he who dreads hostility is unfit to lead. I'm intrigued by that. I mean, Mandela had to deal with this. And sometimes his compassion might have made those around him see him as he seemed like not, or to be one who dreads hostility. But he handled it well. I mean, the ultimate, having to deal with his, former wife and eventually, dealing with the process of the constitution of getting rid of a minister. Now, in today's terms, I find that a lot of leaders are afraid to confront issues. And this is a very strong word. He who dreads hostility is unfit to rule.
To rule, yes, yeah. I think it's self-explanatory. I'll just make a statement. When you know that you are right, who is this pop star who says, it's a musician who says, ain't no flies on me. If you know that you don't have any flies on you,
yes.
If you know that Tsepo does not have anything on you, you're not afraid to say, Tsepo, this thing that you're doing is wrong. Because Tsepo won't turn around and says, no, but now there's something wrong that you're doing. Mandela believed in himself. He believed in the rightness of his position. Hence, he could follow Seneca's dictum to the letter. He did not fear hostility. He was willing to lead.
One other quality of leadership that intrigues me about Utata was the sense of responsibility. Him walking out and saying, no, I gave the instructions at Shell House. Now, that is a sense of leadership that we need to build, and probably if we could find a way of tapping it and teaching it some way. Because in today's terms, a lot of leadership does not take responsibility.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest problems is there's a word we use, and that word is to create structures that will then act for us when we are supposed to be the ones, the be all and the end all. I think if you look at some of the examples of Mandela, you look at, for instance, how he very unpopularly dealt with the AIDS crisis when he admitted that even within his own family, this is what had led to the death of his son. That was bravery. That was leadership.
I had said to you, I'm going to ask you the question at the end, but I think right now is the right time for me to almost ask you that question. How do we build the leadership and the type of leadership of, your caliber, the Mandela's caliber, and today's caliber, as you said, they see coming into government as their ticket to, untold riches, and, everywhere else, everybody is trying to be a hero. How do we build that? How do we take this mold? I mean, this book it's, to me, I think it's much more a note in history that need to be entered, and a recorder that should be taught in schools and be discussed, and the different bits and pieces of the difficult decision that the old man had to take.
You know, I think one good thing about what has happened with the new democracy from that 1994 and throughout, you know, the years, the creation of the parliamentary processes, etc. When it comes to, for instance, when it comes to the creation of the Chapter 9 institutions, I think there must be a lot more rigor when a person has got to go into a position of responsibility. There must be as much rigor as, for instance, when we are interviewing for a
senior person,
or even, you know, has happened for an auditor general.
Yes.
You know, somebody, for a person to be put through their paces, for due diligence to be done, for us to know that this person has been through this healing fire and can withstand the temptations of office, can withstand the blandishments of office, can withstand all sorts of turbulence and headwinds, you know, because what we have that sometimes passes for leadership in South Africa is pitiable, and we are, you know, the worse for it as a people. We need to be in a situation where people make promises of performance to say that this is what I will achieve within this particular time, and if it does not happen, you have a right to take me out.
I don't think people think like that Langa. It's more like, you know, the easiest I could take of, what do they call it, of as an individual performance contract. That would be easy for me, and that's what I'm doing. Now, as a journalist, Mandela's relationship with the media, it was always quite interesting that he understood it as a necessary evil, as it is referred to in the book. But in as much as he was a darling of the media, he also was very vocal and critical of the media. And some would say today, nothing has changed from the days when Mandela was complaining about this issue. Do you feel that we've made progress?
I think the media has done, I think we have. I think there has been some progress. The tensions between the various estates has got to be there. Normally, any normal society has got to have that tension between government and media, leadership and media. But the media has got to be a lot more, to my mind, also less fawning of certain specific leaders. It has to really make sure that it drills down to the bottom, to the core of the issues. The president, for instance, has praised the media for its role, and I think he's correct. If you look, for instance, at the whole thing of the state commission on state capture, that whole revelation, those revelations, they happened because of a media that really worked with civil society to dig, to go into those areas where it was incredibly dangerous to go, to get information, which, if this thing is treated very correctly and is allowed to go to its logical end, it will make this country incredibly strong.
I want to ask you another question on leadership, but before I go there, and I'm watching my time now, me and you, we can talk until the cows come home, and they are about to come home. The social discourse on, reconstruction and development and the social change and everything we've seen and people using that vehicle to say what has happened in the last few weeks has happened because we have not redressed the issues of the past and the hunger that is there and the Mandela himself setting up the Mandela Foundation and then ultimately he, in as much as he didn't use the word crowdfunding as we use it today, bringing on citizens' involvement and the participation of business, and actually, I think we can do more. But is there a way in which the formula can be replicated over and over again and be brought into a space where we can actually make a big difference? I mean, obviously jobs will make a big difference, but
I'm actually glad you have asked that question because it's something that has been really knocking at the back of my mind when I look at our society. I was having a conversation with my wife even today, and we were talking about what can be done now, today, that can start to make an impact and really change the program, as we see it, because everything else that we have tried is not working or has not worked to the expected level of success. And I think that we've got government, we've got labor, we've got the private sector, we've got civil society, we've got ever so many formations, we've got the agreements that are made in NEDLAC, for instance, between government and labor and the industry, whatever. I believe that we do need to have a conversation as a society or as the different, centers of that society to say, what is it that we can do in terms of, for instance, employment? And what is it that you, the private sector, can give? Because we are in a ship that is treading incredibly choppy waters. What is it that you can give that can start to stabilize the situation, as it were? All of us have got to give something. The unions have got to start giving. They've got to make demands, of course. They've got to say that for the workers, but they've also have got to understand that there are other people who are unemployed. How do we create the kind of employment, the kind of situation where the private sector, Gautrain, says, we've got this number of people, but I think we can bring a few more to do this and that. If you look at the fact that it's the people who are the poorest of the poor, who are at the forefront of saving this country from itself, I believe that those are the people that also need to be brought in one way or the other in our different formations. And for us who are earning so much, to start thinking about perhaps there needs to be more money going towards a fund which would address this and that. And of course, education. Employment is a tinderbox. It just does need to be looked at quite seriously. Education is a tinderbox. It has got to be. And we also have got to start rethinking, to think differently. We must be heading towards that Norway I was talking about, but that Norway which is located in South Africa.
Now, in all of that, and I don't seek to be a contrarian, Dr. Langa, the challenge is, citizens' involvement and partnership with, what do they call it, with business. Somebody asked me if we could actually be able to build a Gautrain using similar models to what is being used for Crossrail 1 and Crossrail 2, where the city or the business part of London chose to pay more tax so that they could create a fund to build a means of transport that allowed the city to function better. And my argument was that sort of a thing only works where business trusts government. Now, we sit with that challenge in South Africa, where business has a certain view of government and government has a certain view of, what do they call it, of business. And amazingly enough, even in the book way back in Mandela's time, the problem had said there. I think strongly, and I believe that, what do they call it, and probably as a comment, that we need a president who's going to, and I always believe this is the president to be able to make that work.
No, I believe that also because he has got instincts, he understands the business world, and I think the business world does trust him. I think one of what is seen as his sins is he's seen as being too close to business. But having said all that, I think that what you're saying is correct. But we also do need to change a lot of the structure of how even that business itself functions. Let me give you an example. You look at the agricultural sector. It's one sector that I believe can absorb millions of people insofar as work is concerned, insofar as employment is concerned. The only problem we find, and we've got to name names, the problem that we have is that the agricultural sector is absolutely in the grip of white hands. They will not let go. What can be done to make sure that black farmers, we start to create industry, we start to create manufacturing industry in South Africa? We used to do that. Let's have a conversation about that now. What is it that we can start to do ourselves, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Before I go to the questions that are online.
Oh, there are questions.
There are questions online. There are questions online. Let me just, what do they call it? Let me just, trust as a quality of leadership. And I am reminded of the moment when, what do they call it? When Trevor Manuel inadvertently ended up in hot water with the great Mandela about the issue of the moving of parliament.
Okay.
From, what do they call it? From Cape Town. What are your thoughts about that? Because some people is either, so like me, I give you 100% in the beginning, and you can chip away at it. Or you could build up from there. So I trust you. From the time I meet you, I trust you. But some people, from the day they meet you, they don't trust you. So you got to build up to the 100%. Now, what is your thoughts on trust and how trust is built and how trust is lost?
I believe in a very horrible thing that was said by when what was his name now? Ronald Reagan had a meeting with Gorbachev, and he said, "Trust but verify." I think trust is something that can be built. Trust is a relationship. It does not just happen in the abstract. The private sector must do things, like I was saying earlier, must know also that it has to give something for it to be able to get something for. It must be willing to.
It's a give and take.
Yeah, it's a give and take. So trust is like that, I believe. But I believe also that with the existence today of ever so many possibilities for civil society to put government on the hot seat, it is through that they can acquire that trust.
Yes.
Because it's only when people have really admitted, when, for instance, the president the other day said that, started to admit that there were problems, they'd lost the ball somewhere.
Yes.
I think no matter how much that might be seen as a form of weakness, it is actually a form of strength. That's how you build trust, by admitting that here we think we really
Do so well.
didn't do so well.
Yes.
That's when you are saying to people that we are going to start rectifying some of these problems.
Somebody is asking here about Umkhabolo. He's asking, do you teach any classes where more of us can learn from your wealth of knowledge, especially ethical leadership and skills of the future?
I'm also a student of ethical leadership, and I do now and then sit with young people, and we do discuss some of these issues. I'll leave my details with Tsepo.
Thank you, sir. Somebody has asked, what can you advise the youth of today of being active citizens and holding those into power to account? And that's an important question, because I think the youth of today have written themselves into a different way of being able to interact with government. I mean, when we grew up, and our relationship with what do they call it, we had no relationship with our government, but once we were the ones who understood that we are not part of the ruling class, we are actually the ruling class. So somebody is asking, how does the youth of today actually hold their government to account? Well, beyond voting.
Beyond voting, yeah. Well, I think voting is a starting point.
Yes.
But I do believe that there are very many institutions that relate to youth and youth activities. They are also, there's a lot of activism that's happening even in the cultural arena, where I think people must latch on to. But civil society activism, that's where the youth, I think, must also find itself or find its niche.
So, this is an interesting one. What was the South Africa you envisioned while you were still in exile? What would you have liked it to look like? Obviously, the one we have is one of the best places to live in the world, but
I'll say something that was said by a writer. Yeah. His name is David Hare. He's a dramatist. He said, an exile walks around the world carrying in his head an image of a perfect universe. I walked around the world holding in my head an image of a perfect universe, and that universe is my country. Whatever was happening that was good in various jurisdictions, I thought I would borrow and bring back to enrich, to make my country stronger and much more desirable as a destination.
But I think with this book, you've done exactly what you had hoped for.
I hope so, yeah.
You've done exactly what you had hoped for. You've told the story of, what do they call it, of a great man and in actual fact, I was actually thinking that this man should actually be made the presidential historian. No other person should be allowed to write the tales of our presidents except this man. Writing themselves.
One of my friends who passed away in 2018, Ndate Brawili used to say that the most important thing for anyone who wants to write is to read as much as possible. And I think that's the starting point. Then I think what's happening now, which is very good, is that there's a beginning to be a burgeoning of writers' organizations. There's one called NWASA, National Writers Association of South Africa, which is run by Lance Nawa. You can find that if you just Google it to do the same thing, then you can start to write. Yeah.
This question comes from somebody who's highly knowledgeable. The Lovedale Press in Alice recently reported to be facing a closure, despite holding 200 years of Black Writers Archives and IP. Are you involved in any form in what do they call it, in us trying to save this as what do they call it, as an issue?
I'm involved in the ANC's National Archives Commission or Committee. And these are some of the issues that we are looking at. The Lovedale Press, we cannot afford to lose that, nor can we afford to lose the archives. The archives of South African archives already at the University of Fort Hare. So there is some activity that is taking place.
That is incredible, and we actually believe that it's what do they call it? It's actually commendable, because they, the work that was started by the former president Thabo Mbeki in saving the archives out in Timbuktu, and other works, and what do they call it? As we continue with the process of building his library, and ultimately, I was not very happy that he went to a Londoner to come and design the library, but I'm only but a soldier in the what do they call it, in the trenches, and everything that needs to be done. Now, as we continue on, and what do they call it, and the rest of the questions are coming through, from your own formulation, I mean, Dr. Mandela's, what do they call it, lamented this in his last speech to both the ANC and to Parliament, and the time to sit and think. In your way of doing things, how do you find the time to sit and think? Because we are so inundated with emails, phones, the next thing that needs to be done.
You will go out of your mind if you do not give yourself that possibility to cut off from things, to say, I am budgeting these 2 hours just for creative time, for creative thought, for creative activity. It's something that I really encourage for everyone, Leaders, people who might be finding themselves in positions where they have to make decisions, do need to do that. The problems that you are finding, in fact, right now with this advent of COVID, there is a lot more what I can call a bombardment of people with information, with negative information. And there's a lot more, there's a rise in mental
health
issues. So people need to take care of that,
There's an issue that I wanted to raise, and which was always intrigued me. The role of traditional leaders in governing the country, and the manner in which Mandela related to it, despite the fact that with his lineage as part of the Abatembu clan, he never played on it, and he was also the one to say there must be a role in modernizing, the kings and the chieftainship. But what is your view of what is the role of traditional leadership in order they call it? I mean, and with us making reference to the events of the last week.
Yeah. You will be surprised to know that South Africa is actually, even though we've got all the cities and modern economy, but a surprisingly huge or a significantly huge population of this country still finds itself connected to a traditional base of sorts. And so given that, you cannot by any stretch of the imagination say that you want to wish because traditional leaders are a sign, are a carryover of our own traditional way of living, of life, of where we come from, of our origins. Now, there has got to be some kind of compact between the different structures of governance and traditional leadership, which is why, for instance, I'm part of the CRL, which stands for the Commission on Culture, Religion and Language Rights of South Africans. And so we deal a lot with traditional leadership, because you also have got to think about those traditional systems of doing things. You've got to think about the fact that quite a huge sector of our population still goes to the mountain for circumcision, for initiation, for all sorts of rites and rituals. And so these are some of the things that are the staple of our society. You must not look at society from what you only think of in terms of the urban area. Let me tell you something that made me laugh today on the radio. They were talking about this whole thing of the president, the former president, asking for his trial to be in front of a judge. Yeah. And some joker phones and says that on the radio, on Azania Musaga's show, that you must remember that for me, if I'm an accused, I have to appear before the judge with my muti to be able to influence the decisions. But he was making a joke. I'm not saying that. But at the end of it all, I'm just saying that people, we still have got what they call informal knowledge systems. Yes. There's a lot that still needs to be done in this country to bring in the countryside into Sentin and to take Sentin to the countryside, so that we, all of us, are working in tandem. That's the role of traditional leadership, if it's done well. If you look at some of the abuses are now being taken to court, the Ngonyama Trust, all those things are being sorted out. So we must not look at society as us and them. We are one. We have to find a way of pushing together towards this destination that we want to reach.
Interesting, and one of the most powerful things I've even probably heard today. I was just checking my script and what I had been given. You know, I work with powerful women, so I must be careful of not reading what they ask me to do. Now, one of the things that troubled me this week, and in the last 2 weeks, is initially when this thing was not taking, place at the rate that everybody wanted it at. There was a lot of fake news, a recycling of videos and old videos and lots of other things, and also there's also the use of snippets of videos that have been clipped together to be able to create a certain notion, and to create a notion that the country was and sensationalize it. As a generalist, what are your thoughts about that, and what also are your thoughts about this issue of fake news? Because we live in the world where people can just create a story.
Look, I believe that there are certain organizations like the Media Monitoring Africa, which have come up with software that can give you an understanding, that can help you to an app that can make you know whether this is a real news or fake news. So people should be arming themselves with approaches, with access to some of those apps, that kind of software. But I do believe also that there's a responsibility in terms of some of the media itself, to make sure that the dangers of fake news is trumpeted as much as possible. Because if you remember, fake news did not start now with WhatsApp or...
Yes.
We must remember, for instance, that the 1994 massacre, the genocide in Rwanda, was basically through fake news, through the radio that spread all the propaganda regarding the Tutsis and the Hutus. So it's something that has been used by Hitler, it's something that has been used by the Nationalist Party government, you know, the apartheid government in the past. It's not a new thing. It's just been made now a lot more quicker because of the devices that we have. Fake news has led to losses of life, and it's something that has got to be stopped one way or the other. Yeah.
In your thoughts, looking at the events of the past week, beyond the consultation, beyond the need to be inclusive, beyond the need to be able to bring traditional leaders on board, because a lot of what ended up going towards, so when we had stopped this thing in the major cities, then it was then moved to the outlying towns, especially in KZN. Here you couldn't move it that much because part of it was the fact that, I'll be honest with you, pre-1993, where I come from there, we banned one of the malls. And the mall was only reinstated 10 years later. And that in itself, the people learned. So the people know the pain of having to take a taxi to go to town and leave a building that you used to walk to. Somebody put up on social media that in a place called Itsuseng,
I know.
Yes, they banned the mall there, and you literally have to go 40 kilometers to Lichtenberg or 50 kilometers to Mafikeng to go and shop.
Ish.
27 years later. And that was banned on the same time, I think either in 1993 or in early 1994, when people didn't want Wangope in and around them.
Right.
Now, here, this wouldn't have taken root. Beyond, it's not even a tribal issue. It's a logic of pain. Yeah. Of being able to know that
and history
and the ones who do not learn and try and repeat the same thing over and over again. And we can always ask ourselves what happened in some of the the townships where it did happen. But you also recognize that those places never had a mall back then, so they never had something of that sort done, and they will learn now. But what is in the lessons, beyond? I mean, this is an incredible book, Dr. Langa, and it's an incredible capture of history. And as I said, I did recognize that you were restraining yourself from creative writing to be able to create an incredible record, and all of that. What? In a parting shot, what is your thoughts about what could we really do to be able to actually not only bring leadership, but also to bring an ability for us to manage certain things?
The question that you asked regarding the forums is very important, because it speaks exactly to some of the problems that you are facing today. I'm really serious when I'm saying that there has been a demobilization of the South African public, where people believe that everything has got to be done by the government. Whereas I think we ourselves have got the capacity to build those structures of human interaction, to be able to reach the various, act like capillaries into the various sectors of our communities, the youth, to try, Agostino Neto in Angola has got this there was a poster once you arrive in Luanda which says, resolver the problema do povo, resolve the problems of the people.
Yeah.
I believe that once we have that consciousness, that we need, you remember when there was each one teach one,
Yes. Yeah.
all those
Programs, yes.
programs.
Yeah.
Those are some of the things. Our media has got a role. The story you're telling, for instance, of Itsu Singh and then having bent your model down, which is the same thing, even in traditional kind of language, where you say you don't mess up the tree which will have to give you shade later. We have messed up the tree that gives us shade. This is something that can be spoken, can be preached in the churches, in the various forms, is an abomination and must not be repeated.
Dr. Langa, me and you can talk till the cows come home. It's 5 o'clock and the cows need to come home.
No, thank you so much.
I've had an incredible time hosting you. And in essence, our gratitude goes to yourself for agreeing to, what do they call it, to join us on board. It is a difficult time, in our country. And the Nelson Mandela Foundation, we also would like to thank them. The publishers, Penn Macmillan, for agreeing to, what do they call it, to be on board. And in all its earnest, we just lost one member of our team as the Gautrain Management Agency to COVID. And in Dr. Ingrid Johnson's memory, we would like to thank you in the phrase made famous by Dr Mandela that most people do not still understand properly today. I thank you.
I thank you.
Thank you, sir, and thank you for
so
what they call it, for the time you've taken.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for making the time.